Thanks everybody for joining us today for this sit-down session discussion with DB and Dara about the history of drum and bass and other things. It's going to be a freestyle thing today, so we welcome your questions and stuff. So we'll just get it going. Let's do an intro representing New York City, and from his Wikipedia page it says DJ Dara, Brooklyn, New York, Irish DnB DJ. He's also co-founder of Breakbeat Science record label and store. He's a key member of the Planet of the Drums crew, which is a nationwide drum and bass tour, and he's released 10 drum and bass mix CDs.
An update on that.
Yeah,
well, it's 8 mixes and 2 full-length albums.
Okay. On labels such as Slant, Moonshine, and Breakbeat Science, please welcome DJ Dara.
Sounds pretty impressive when you read it off the card.
Yeah. Next intro, he is a DJ, producer, and record label executive representing New York City, originally from London, co-founder of the infamous Breakbeat Science record store and label, A&R and record label executive for multiple labels including Profile, Warner Brothers, Smile, Breakbeat Science, and probably some others that he'll share more about. He's a true and early pioneer of the U.S. electronic music scene, especially the rave scene and the U.S. drum and bass scene. A true original and a great inspiration, DJ DB.
Making me blush.
Yeah, I wanted to. That was the whole point of the intro. And I'm sure I missed a lot of other highlights we could put in both of your careers, which have been really impressive. I guess starting with DB, you came to the U.S. in 1989. Is that correct?
Actually came over in '88.
Okay.
Fell in love with New York, went back to London, and broke up with a girlfriend there. Lost my job. Well, actually, I quit my job at the club I was working in, and decided to give New York a crack. So I came back in '89 for 3 months. And 22 years later, I'm still here.
22 years later, which is just amazing. I think it was 1993. It was a rave in Pennsylvania or something, and I went to see. I was like 17 years old, and I remember after seeing your sets, I would always come up to you and say hi, and I actually pulled this tape out that you had given me that day.
Really?
It says DJ DB on it, and me and my friend Chris, we listened to that tape over and over and over, and like it was a big inspiration. And I think one of the things I remembered about it mostly was just the fact that you gave me a tape. No. Like you gave me a tape with all these songs that like you were playing, and back then drum and bass was come join us. Hi. It wasn't being played as much as other forms of dance music, so we are always excited to hear your sets.
Do you still have the tape?
I do. I actually pulled it out, and
it still works, doesn't it?
It does. I was listening to it. I was going to digitize it for you.
Do you remember what the tape's called?
I think it was Breakbeat.
Something. They all call Breakbeat.
Yeah,
something.
like number 3, but
right.
It was like it had a lot of moving shadow things on it, and some reinforced things.
And you didn't mock the fact that there were probably lots of car crashes along the way.
No, I mean it wasn't even about it. It was just great to get a mix and have those tracks.
Cool.
And but yeah, thanks for that, because that was definitely
More than welcome.
a key point, and always hearing both of you guys throughout the years, over all these years, has been great. So DB, starting in New York City, I guess it was even before the rave scene when you started.
Yeah, totally. I came over playing house and hip hop,
Mm-hmm.
and then as British music kind of evolved into drum and bass, I was sort of hearing bits of it and loving bits of it, and I
Mhm.
started to sort of wanting to play it more and more into the sets I was playing. But what was happening was the mainstream sort of New York club crowd just didn't want anything to do with it,
Right.
and so that sort of pushed me to throw parties for people, like-minded people. That's
Mhm.
how I started throwing parties in New York. Yeah.
NASA.
Well, pre that.
You can pre-NASA.
Yeah.
So, would it be, I know this is kind of a tough question, but possible for you to give like a 30,000 foot view, like a timeline of drum and bass music from 1989, and you can go in spans of, years, late 90s.
Right.
Sure.
What year's Weary?
That was until 1991.
Okay, so that was like,
It's a record called We Are IE by Lenny the Ice.
Mhm.
and that was definitely a seminal record for me when I first heard it. I was like, weird, cool.
Yeah.
But there were records that sort of built up to that. It's hard. Can you throw?
Well, it's
some-
like, in like 1989, 1990, the sort of whole European techno thing was happening, and that started to go to England and got really big in England.
Mhm.
But then the English guys started throwing breakbeats behind it,
Yeah.
creating this other sound that had the sort of elements of that whole Belgian techno thing, but then they were using breakbeats as well. So it's like our sped up hip hop
Yeah. Yeah.
loops. And it was that started to develop into its own sound, which was the early breakbeat stuff. And then when
then called hardcore.
yeah, exactly. And then when We Are IE, and also another one, I would sort of arguably the two tracks that kind of pointed the direction this was going to go was We Are IE by Lenny the Ice and a guy called Gerald, 28 Done Bad Boy. Those two came out in 1991, and they had that sort of reggae-ish bass line with a sped up break beat, and it had this vibe that was like, this is where things were going to go. And those are probably two records that most people will credit as saying, you know what, once they came out, people were like, okay, this is going somewhere completely different than the whole Belgian techno thing.
Right, it was almost as if the bass line went half time.
Yeah.
It's so you had this reggae sort of half skank vibe to it, and before that, beats were just getting faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
And suddenly, the beats were getting faster, but there was this groovy kind of slowed down.
The whole sort of reggae-ish vibe started to come in.
And then the breakbeats.
And then the breakbeats started getting faster
On
and
top of
faster
the
and faster.
4/4.
Yeah, exactly. And then the 4/4 kind of
Disappeared.
and it was just the breaks that were left.
And that was
Then you got into 92,
DJs like
93.
you, though, right? Who would maybe you played some 4/4 with breakbeats.
Oh,
but
absolutely,
then you would then switch to just almost all breakbeats in some of your. When did you come to America?
I came to New York in 94, but I'd already been DJing in Ireland for several years before that.
Okay,
so I started in around 1989, 1990. And certainly in those days, it was all, well, certainly me and all my friends, we used to do our own parties at home. We just called it all techno, whether it had breakbeats or whether it was housey or whatever. It was just, it's all techno. There was no sort of distinction in subgenres.
Yeah.
There also wasn't as much music being produced then, obviously. So you would play a bit of everything in a set. It was all around the same tempo. It was only when the breakbeat hardcore started to get faster and faster and faster that you couldn't really play it with house anymore, because you were getting up to like 140, 150 beats per minute. But you would still play. I would certainly played some Belgian techno and stuff with that in like 92, 93. And then I guess the whole jungle thing started happening. 93 is when it started getting really jungly, beat the records
really
and all. Then you could
it.
say, okay, right, this is it. And happy hardcore went one way and jungle went another way.
And the mainstream sort of clubs absolutely wanted nothing to do with jungle.
Yeah, and I think that's where I wanted this. The question kind of goes like, okay, so we know the music is getting distinguished around this time, 92 to 94-ish.
Yeah.
And in the U.S. specifically for drum and bass, I think, 93 was the year that we formed the Too Tough crew here in DC, and we had UDB with Lonnie back in Baltimore at the warehouse. Actually, I think Darren.
I played Passage to the Ultra. That was the first one I ever played.
Okay.
That wasn't until
But that one you were
95.
talking about was, I think, was the first time I got booked out of town for New York.
Oh, okay.
New York as well, so that was a big gig for me.
Yeah, and that was one of the first all drum and bass parties in the DC, Baltimore area. And I think, you know, the East Coast with Philly, New York, Boston, DC, like I kind of look at it as one drum and bass scene back then, where we were booking a lot of, you know, the DJs representing each city. And from there, where do you guys take it from there?
Well, for me, you know, certainly I will have to just sort of backtrack a little bit. When he said my first gig out of town was also for Lonnie, and that was, you know, I was playing a Concrete Jungle in New York at the time, in late '94, and some guy came up to me. I played a set, and he said, "Do you want to play a party in Baltimore?" I was like, "Sure." I didn't know who it was. It was Lonnie, but I didn't know that at the time. It was just some dude. I'm like, "Sure, you want me to come play up there?" So I thought I was, you know, going to be playing like Concrete Jungle, a couple of hundred people. So I get to this thing, and there's like 1,500 people, and I was shitting myself. And I was also the only guy playing jungle, and I was playing between Doc Martin and Adam X, so it was like doubly shit myself. But it was like it just went off, and that really, you know, for me, that's definitely was a seminal moment when things started to really take off for me. It's like sort of all over the East Coast, then I started to play other parties. So I really got to credit Lonnie, but he was someone who was putting on things like forcing people to listen to it, kind of, because he had his Adam X and his Doc Martin and all that. He's like, well, you're also going to listen to this as well on the same floor. There's no escape. Well, you could go in and listen to Mixmaster Morris in the ambient room, as it was in those days. So, you know, for me, that's what really sort of, you know, it was the East Coast. The whole DC Baltimore area was really sort of seminal in my career, definitely in that era. There was just so much going on down here between, you know, Lonnie's parties at Buzz and Bass Rush, and you guys did, what was it, Renegades? Is that the parties?
We did.
You did Groove Rider one time, didn't you?
We did. We were the first to host.
Yeah, I remember seeing video of that. Actually, I wasn't actually at that one, but the guys from You Buzzin' had video from it.
I remember it. It's one of the funny stories. Like, okay, so we were one of the first promoters the U.S. to host Groove Rider, right? But I remember the night, like, okay, I was 17 or something, really young. I had no right to be throwing a party. I had no idea what I was doing, right? And the sound system was like really screwed that night. And I remember Groove Rider in like this gold, silver suit, all docked out, and he's like, what am I trying to fix the sound system? Because it was like messed up, and, you know, lessons learned from throwing parties when, you know, I'm still in high school. I have no idea what I'm doing, but, you know, we had to do it. If we didn't throw a drum and bass party,
nobody else. There was this real sort of diehard mentality then. There was this like real sort of underdog thing, I think, which has always been part of the whole jungle scene.
It still is too.
Yeah, and you know, when DB was saying that the mainstream clubs didn't want to touch it, even like in the UK for a long time, they didn't want to touch it, or they were like, oh, that's dead, blah, blah. But it was always this independent infrastructure that kept it going. There was a pirate radio station. They didn't rely on mainstream media or mainstream attention for it to keep going, and I think that kind of translated over here too, where it got this sort of really diehard underdog sort of mentality from people who were just like, yeah, jungle is my thing, and that's what I'm going to do, and I don't care if we have to do our own parties, etc.
I've always thought of us as kind of the poor, ugly relation to dance culture, like, you know what it
gets all the girls stuff.
Right. So DB, I guess we need to backtrack a little bit, because NASA was like for me, I think was a very influential club, and just an influential crew, because you, Jason Jinx, Ani,
Soul Slinger,
right?
Those were the four that were kind of pushing the UK jungle.
And I remember going to one of the NASA parties. I think Johnny L was performing live with his like little guitar or keyboard thing, and
that's the final party.
Oh, was that?
That's the 1 year anniversary of the start, and coincidentally the final NASA.
Wow.
Yeah, it only ran for 12 months.
First and last
July
anniversary.
23rd, July 23rd.
July 23rd of what year?
92 to 93.
Okay.
We did a few sort of renegade events afterwards under the name NASA, but my heart wasn't in it. But yeah, the actual party, the Johnny L thing was that we did it in conjunction with XL Recordings at the time, and it was huge for me, because I think Liam from the Prodigy was a guest DJ.
Yeah, I saw some of those flyers of some
Yeah.
people before, they had really blown up playing at those parties. So,
So today it's like, nowadays it's almost 20 years later, and so it's a privilege to be, sitting here having a discussion with you about it now. So and also back then, besides NASA and DJing, you were a key figure in as a A&R for Profile, correct?
What happened was I came over and I met this guy called Gary Peeney. He was like an Anglophile and loved anything coming over from England, London. So he was the vice president of Profile Records at the time. Oh, wow.
He was responsible for these CDs.
Gary introduced me to Corey Robbins, who owned Profile, and Corey offered me a gig doing consulting for Profile, like bringing in records that I thought were cool that could go into their system. So I brought them one or two things, and then Gary suggested to Corey that they hire me as like a proper A&R consultant. Like, I've never worked for a record company before, and I was like, amazing, sure, love to. And Gary and I started doing the Best of Techno series together, and there was no competition. There was literally nobody putting out techno in America at that time. So we, our first Best of Techno Volume 1 sold 100,000 units. And we were like,
which back then was pretty impressive.
Incredible, right? So that encouraged more releases, and we started looking at the idea of doing artist releases, like signing people, and he was one of the first. I think by that time the two owners of Profile had split up, and the remaining owner had said to Gary, why don't you do like an imprint, do your own label, and so it's not associated with Profile, because Profile had such a hip-hop reputation. So it was originally going to be called NASA Recordings, but my partner at the time wanted money from Profile, so Gary was like, so Gary came up with the name Smile Communications and came up with a really clever logo for it.
That was clever, actually. Like looking back on it now with the emoticon.
Yeah.
Ahead of his time.
He
That was
invented
Gary.
emoticons.
That was Gary.
You should take credit.
So Smile was born, I guess that's 93 or 94. And
This one is volume.
It's on Profile, though. That's not on Smile.
Right, but this was volume 4. This came out in 93. When did you start with volume
91.
1? Okay.
91. But that wasn't on Smile. The first Best of Technos were on. The first big release for me on Smile was History of Our World Part 1, which I believe is the first drum and bass compilation in America.
And it was a great one. I wish I had.
I have it. I can send you a copy.
Nice. No, I mean I wish I had some of these things here where we could like pass around and show people, like show and tell. But yeah, I remember back then, we had record stores. We had Tower Records, and me and my friends, we could go to the Tower Records and flip through these CDs, and we pick these, and here's some of these tracks like "Let Me Be Your Fantasy," which I would have to say, like every time I think of you, that track, because you would often drop it back then, and the crowd always goes
Everyone
crazy.
played that one back then.
Yeah. Have you heard all of the remixes lately for Let Me Be Your
Oh, that's
Fantasy?
been done about a
They're
million
like
times
millions
in the last
when
20
you say
years.
the
When you
Yeah.
say recently, like how recently?
Oh my gosh, I guess like all sorts of, like
Like dubstep ones?
Yeah, different
No, I haven't heard
genre.
anything like that.
and we were in Miami this past conference, and NBC actually played the We Are E track in his set. I was like, how did he get that in? But he got it. It made sense somehow.
It wasn't a remix.
No, he played the original one.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
I looked at Bailey and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But it worked. The crowd went crazy. Let's see. So it was then Smile Communications.
Smile Communications was born in like 94. Started doing lots, signed him. Started doing lots of 10-inch vinyl. All the releases were on 10-inch vinyl, sort of copying the UK dubplate vibe.
And you signed Dara to. Oh, I'm sorry. One of my first questions for you was: is it Dara or is it Dara?
It's Dara.
Dara.
Is that kind of in between?
Okay. Dara. Signed Dara as
an artist.
To do productions and mix CDs. Is that correct?
I don't think we did.
No, I didn't do a mix.
You didn't do
No,
it?
just
no.
Okay.
to do original music. Yeah, as a recording artist.
My first mixes, I actually signed 2 deals pretty much at the same time, which was kind of nice, which was with Raucous to do the Renegade Continuum CDs, and also with Moonshine to do 4 CDs. So it was pretty much, which kind of pissed off both labels. The CDs came out at the same time, but hey, it was good for me.
So numbers-wise, with the CD compilations that you release, the mix CDs and that you,
I'd say,
how did they do? Like,
to be honest, I can't give you an exact number. I would say initially, certainly obviously the numbers got less and less as CDs became less and less sellable,
right,
and music became more and more free.
Right.
But certainly the first Moonshine CDs did, I don't know, I think between 30 and 40,000, I think, for the first one.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know. I think the Raucous ones, their initial first pressing was only 10,000, which they sold out of. They did actually repress it later when the label got sold to Priority. But yeah, it was generally around 30 to 40,000 you would do back then.
That's crazy.
I know. Now you're lucky to do 3,000.
You'd be lucky to do 3,000.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But of course, DB here, I've got to give him a lot of credit, but also I do have to give a shout to Moonshine for, at the time, a lot of people owed sort of a lot of their popularity to having Moonshine, because they used to play so much music. They paid out 3 a month, 3 CDs, which is something that kind of pissed off the artists, because kind of felt that it was too much coming out at once, that they couldn't really get behind everything. Right? Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of people, it was sort of a go-to label because they were in every store, all over the country. And, certainly myself and AK and Diesel Boy, they were hugely influential on our careers. So, I do kind of miss those days when, a mix CD was a big deal.
Yeah.
Or even a mixtape, it was a big deal to have a mixtape.
Well, let's bring back the mixtape.
That's what I'm saying. It's time.
Cassettes are super hip again. Cassette factories in the UK cannot keep up with
demand.
Oh, you're being serious? Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a super hipster thing.
All 2 of them.
How about we take a pause, and if you guys have any questions for this point of the discussion, feel free to ask.
I got a question. Sour Records.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have some sort of a U.S. post?
They had. They linked with Jungle Sky at one point, which is Soul Slinger's label, which connected with the Liquid Sky store. And they did a Sour US for about 10 minutes. It was I think they put out 1 album or something, and then maybe there was a couple of 12 inches. I think it was a Soul Slinger 12-inch and stuff. But
the guy who ran Sour was a real talker.
Dave Stone. He was a nice guy.
Oh, he's wicked.
You never know where he's going.
Really? A real
No, he was good.
No, he's brilliant. He's brilliant.
He actually booked me at Movement in London back in 1997.
Nice.
I was the first US guy to play at Movement.
Right.
It was before the
main
main room opened in the bar or whatever, but it's my claim to fame.
Nice.
That was back in 97. That was, and I think that's still, is it still going on?
Don't know.
No, I don't think it is.
I'm not sure.
Was that the first UK art Shy Effects doing the PA? Was that Trace or something coming over?
Didn't they do a tour? They did do a Sour US tour at one point, did they? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, Shy Effects.
You did a live PA thing?
Instead of PA or whatever.
Oh yeah, I don't even remember it. Yeah, so long ago, and we're both so
I
old.
thought I had to do it.
My brain is full.
Yeah.
From Smile, when did you guys open up Breakbeat Science?
1996.
And the concept history behind Breakbeat
I was
Science?
partners in a store that was in Liquid Sky in the basement called Temple Records. I was partners with 2 Germans, techno nuts. And Darren worked with me down there, and we noticed that we were becoming both less and less interested in other forms of music. Like before, we were both into house and techno and whatever else, but both of us were becoming really, really not interested in it. And so the idea of a pure drum and bass shop was kind of like, what do you think?
Pretty radical idea.
Yeah. But we were selling more and more of it within Temple, so it felt like, let's take a chance. And it took about, I guess, a year and a half of planning and thinking, should we, shouldn't we? And we found a spot, and that was when, September 96?
Yeah, September 96.
And it just kept growing. It was amazing. It was like such a wonderful little kind of...
Yeah, certainly when we opened, it was like, $200 a day you would do. It was literally... It was like,
if we got $200,
we didn't even know if we were going to last 6 months at that
totally.
point. Because it was really, it was a big sort of risk.
So it was tough at the beginning.
Oh yeah,
but
absolutely.
then, like, when did you start seeing like success or know that it was going to stay?
Well, just for the record, we never actually really made any money at it. All the money went back. It seemed like it's like we were shipping out boxes and boxes of records, but your markup is so small on vinyl,
and
your overhead so high.
And we kept investing it in the business.
Yeah,
every time
T-shirts
and we went to the record label, and it just kept growing. And we kept thinking, what really happened was we took a huge gamble, and right end of '99 we were outgrowing our space. So I looked around New York and I found a really great spot in Orchard Street, which is like the Lower East Side. And we took the lease on that, and we had the best 3 months we'd ever had.
No, that was 2001. It was right before 9/11.
No,
it was 3 months before 9/11.
Right,
That's when we opened.
It was the 3 months right before 9/11.
Then we opened, and then it all went tits up after.
And I think that's a parallel story here in DC, because at that time I was a manager at the Yoshitoshi shop, which is formerly Music Now, and things were solid up until 9/11 and afterwards.
9/11 killed dance culture.
Yeah.
Really.
I think that should be the name of your book.
There you go.
Just thank me in the credits. So, Breakbeat Science, for you guys, you probably remember more the record store aspect of it, because you're grinding every day probably. But I think for us, when I say us, I mean the U.S. drum and bass scene, including everybody here, it was, I guess, more of like an institution. It was like the first drum and bass record store.
It was kind of like a hub.
Yeah, and
it's a microcosm.
And you could go there, you could order records online,
or over the phone. We used to be on the phone with people for hours playing the records.
Right, and and the record label itself, and the clothing. So it became like a brand name for drum and bass in the U.S.
No, it was really nice because, sorry to interrupt, it would be like sometimes I'd be at the store or whatever, and someone would come up to me and they were on vacation from wherever, Oklahoma or Canada or something, and they sort of made a pilgrimage to the store, and it was always really nice to have, there was that kind of vibe in there that people would have heard of the store or whatever, or bought records there for a long time, but once they were in New York they had to come, and it was great. It was like,
and any of the UK boys that were coming to the US would have to come to the store.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we do a Polaroid and stick it up.
It was just, it became a real sort of a focal point, I guess, for the drum and bass scene, which is, I think, the point that you're kind of making, and that felt really good, and it was just nice to have, because, as we were just saying earlier, that whole sort of underdog mentality, the sort of, it was nice, there was somewhere where everybody could go, and, this was all that was there. They didn't have to compete with anything else. They walk in, people would be like, I can't believe all the records in here are drum and bass records, because it was a pretty big store. And that it wasn't just like two bins at the end of the fucking row,
It was impressive. Great catalog. I could have spent lots of money there. But I guess, thank you guys for doing that, because it's probably bigger than you guys realize. You say that you didn't make much money off of it, and
didn't make any money,
or any money.
Let's be clear.
But for other people in the U.S., it was.
And that was always the thing. It was like, as long as we could break even, we would keep it open. Once it started to lose money, we just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, it was like, that's the thing. It was never. I think people sort of would see the sort of size of it and everything, and see the amount of business it was doing, and think, oh, these guys must be making a fortune, but we weren't making any money at all.
Yeah.
But it was just sort of a break-even thing for a long, long time.
I think being a drum and bass artist is a break-even thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But there were times of great success and
oh yeah, it used to sell a lot of records
and for you
for
as well as a DJ.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was great for me as well.
Let's talk about playing on the drums.
Okay.
Because that tour started in 2000. And it went on to become you had a 10-year anniversary.
Yeah,
and
we did 11 years till. We still may do one-off shows, but probably not going to do. Well, who knows what's going to happen in the next few years? Probably not going to do the sort of the set tour thing. You know, Damien particularly is involved in a lot of other things. He's got his own labels and stuff going on, and it's like, you know, we kind of came to this decision, I guess. Well, certainly myself and Dave did that. You know, playing on the drums, traditionally it was a drum and bass thing, that's what it was about, so that's really what we wanted to keep it as. And, you know, Damien has diversified quite a lot now, and he does dubstep and all that stuff, and we really weren't interested in having that as part of playing. It's not that he suggested it or anything, but it was just kind of an understanding that playing on the drums is a drum and bass thing, so that's the way it's if we're going to do it at all, that's the way it's going to be. So, you know, we did, I guess the most recent, we did one here, didn't we, last year?
Yeah,
we did one here last at U Street. I think that might have been the last Playing on the Drum show that we did. Oh, we did one in Denver after that, actually. But
over the 10 years, and the tour itself. So the premise of it was to take drum and bass to the main rooms of clubs and festivals.
It was essentially, you know, I got to credit Damien with it was his idea. It was definitely his idea. It was one night we were all playing together in New Orleans, and we would run into each other occasionally on the road or whatever, but we very rarely all played together on the same night anywhere. But this one time we were in New Orleans, and it was all three of us together, and Damien said, you know what, really cool if the three of us, we were kind of the three highest profile guys at the time, so it would be good if, you know, because we all had the same complaint about going to raves or whatever, going to play at raves, and you'd be walking through the main room on the way to your room, and it's like blind and lasers and sound and shit, and then you get into a little shithole with little stereo speakers, you know. Yeah. So, you know, we'd all have that experience. It's like, you know, well, here's your room. It's right here next to the toilet. So we'd had that experience, and we always had this thing. It was just unfair. It was unfair. You know, apart from even to us, because we were getting paid anyway, whatever, but to the audience who were paying, you know, they were paying the same money that the guys who were going to listen to whatever was going on in the main room, they were paying the same entrance fee, so they should be given the same standard of equipment, etc.
And I think as drum and bass DJs, we know that our music is superior.
Of course. Absolutely.
Right? Like, why isn't our music on the main floor?
Yeah, and we just figured, you know, with the three of us together, because we were the three highest profile guys, that we could sort of, I guess the idea was to try and convince promoters that drum and bass can be a main floor music, that you can get enough people to have it on the main floor.
And the tour was a clear success of doing that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is what we set out to do, and this is really what happened.
So you did that for 10 years. Like, was it during the summer that you'd go?
It changed. It was generally around 6 weeks long. We did it in spring a few of the years, and we did it later in the year. It depended. Sometimes Damien was on tour, because Damien had some other things going on. Occasionally he had like the Monsters of Jungle thing going on at one point. So we had to try and do it so that he wasn't doing tours back to back or whatever. But yeah, it was amazing to some of the places that we played and some of the turnouts, and it definitely turned some promoters' heads. They were like, oh, because they were always kind of a little skittish about putting drum and bass on the main floor. I don't know, people are going to leave. We're not going to get the numbers. And we'd go to like Knoxville or somewhere, and they'd have like more people out on a Wednesday night than they'd had on the Saturday for whoever house and techno guy was in town. So it was a clear success in that regard. We never, one thing that people always sort of hassled us about, which we never actually managed to do, was a mix CD. which is kind of well. There's definitely some bootleg mixes going around online. That's for sure. Because people, oh man, that set you did, I've been playing that. And I'm like, really? I didn't even know it was recorded. So that used to happen quite a lot, actually.
Still does.
Yeah, I know. It's
We're recording you guys
tonight.
You don't think we're recording tonight, but we are.
Oh well, I think we were notified we were recording. So.
Oh, okay.
That means I'm going to suck even worse than
wicked.
So I guess a reminder for you all, Dara and DB will be performing tonight at the Warehouse, which is just a block from here. Your set is from 12:30 to 2:30 now.
Yeah.
And you're playing a back-to-back set?
Yes. And we're going to
all
old school it.
All classics?
Yeah.
Is it going to be all vinyl?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So
Unless
that's something to look forward to tonight. So, Dara,
yes.
with your non-stop nationwide touring around the U.S., like gigs, so many gigs over all these years, frequent flyer miles, please discuss.
I used to be a lot better with the frequent flyer miles because I used to be more sort of inclined to want to stay on the same airline. Now I just want to get there the quickest way that I can, so it's kind of spread out across a lot of different airlines. Also, you don't get as much as you used to on airlines. Are like you get less, you pay more for less with airlines now.
But I guess my question was more like, wow, so many flights, so many airports, so many cities that you
I actually still, if I haven't been out of town for a couple of weeks and then I go to the airport, it feels
like home.
I'm like, yes. Back at LaGuardia. No, it feels like, I know it's weird that it has become sort of a comfort zone, I guess. And even like flying, it's like people are like, how do you fly? Because like my girl, for example, hates flying. She just, she's like a wreck. And it's one of the things that I just don't have any choice. I don't have a choice to be afraid to fly. It's like I don't have the option.
Right. With the Planet of the Drums tour, did you guys have a tour bus or were you flying?
No, we flew. The only time I've ever traveled on a bus was a moonshine tour. That was in '99, and that was actually great. It was better than flying because we would finish. It was one of these like buses with like 12 bunks on it or whatever, and it was myself and I think Carl Cox was on it and Cirrus. There was a few other moonshine artists on it. But you would come out of the venue at like 4 a.m, get on the bus, get into your bunk. It was like a coffin. It was like pitch black, and you'd wake up in the next city, fully rested. 8 hours later, it was perfect. It was better than having to get out of bed after 2 hours, go to the airport, blah blah blah. So I wish I had done more touring on buses, but flying does get kind of it's tiring. It's definitely tiring. But with stuff like delays and all that stuff, I really don't freak out anymore because there's nothing you can do about it. You're absolutely powerless over this stuff. Screaming at the girl behind the counter is not going to uncancel the flight. So it's like, I see people just, having seizures in the airport about delays and stuff. It's just like, what's the point, So, I've gotten pretty good at it. I do still enjoy traveling, I really do.
DB?
Yeah.
How's your doodles going?
Doodles are coming on good. It's really.
We'll put that on the web after.
Sell it.
So I wanted to compliment you on your website. I was just looking at it the first time, like the other day.
Which site?
You're DJDB.com.
Oh God, I haven't even Thank you.
I haven't looked at
Thank you. I haven't looked at that for
So
years. I know it definitely needs an update.
If you guys haven't seen it, I saw it today and it's really cool. DJDB.com.
Thank you.
And on it has his info about his mixes, his bio, and your bio. I wanted to bring that up because I read it and. It was such. It was a really like engaging and honest read. Like really, if you guys, you should read it because he's really telling his whole story, probably in more detail than we can get through tonight. But like, one thing that stood out is you're saying that you kind of are anxious and don't like talking to people or something to that effect. Like
I'm shy.
Yeah, which. Usually you don't think of performers, DJs who are such an integral part of the scene being so shy, and maybe that's just as an artist, but
it's a weird thing. It's like the desire to be behind the deck is very strong, but not to have the spotlight on at the same time.
Right,
it's
right.
a very weird thing.
Yeah, and I kind of feel that too. I was actually more nervous about the moderating session today because I'm having to talk in front of the crowd.
I couldn't do what you're doing.
Then DJing, which is funny. But so we got through the end of the 90s, 2000 to 2010. You're doing Playing the Drums tour. DB, you started some more music production stuff with Staka, correct?
Yeah, I did. I spent a year making an album with Staka, which we put out. I don't know, it must be.
That was under a different alias?
Yeah, Rorschach.
Okay.
We picked a name that sounded more like a band name. We wanted to try and sort of sell it. Basically, what we did is we made a drum and bass album for people who don't like drum and bass. We really wanted to make a musical record with singers and traditional song structures, but using drum and bass as the sort of background that people might not even notice. So there's some cover versions on there. And it was a really interesting process. I will never do it again, but it was a really interesting process.
So never do it again, like music production or making your own album?
Both, I think. The effort that it took for the reward, really not worth it. A year.
You've never been fond of sitting in the studio.
No, not a fan of sitting in the studio. I'm not a gearhead, so it's basically I'm communicating ideas through someone else, which is not that easy. Stacker's brilliant. He's really, really patient and intuitive of what I meant a lot of the time. But for a year's worth of work to then put out a record and it sells 6 copies, it's like, what's the point? I mean, we did get it licensed. It was synced, picked up by CSI and CSI Miami and used in both of those, which was mind-blowing.
Cool.
Yeah, and that sort of actually paid as opposed to not paying. But yeah, it's an incredible amount of effort, and you just, it's amazing. Like you pick up a record and you think, oh yeah, it's interesting. But a year's worth of work went into somebody making that, and there are millions of records that come out every week, and like most of them don't get talked about for 5 minutes.
There's a lot of records that come out, and then there ain't been nothing like a year spent on them.
True. Yeah, I mean, I'm proud of the music on it for sure. I love, even when I hear it now, I'm like, yeah, that really is good. So I am proud of it. But music for me, it's like, since I stopped working for record companies a while ago because they don't exist anymore. So what that meant was I started enjoying music again just for me, rather than listening to it thinking about could this sell, or how would we market this, or how we should make this leave, or whatever. So I just started really, really enjoying music again. I'm actually so into what's coming out again, not specifically drum and bass, but just general music. So I love actually not working in music. I'm trying to create a new career for myself in other things. But
Well,
okay. Okay.
So let's see. Drum and bass in the U.S. from, I guess, let's say post 9/11. For drum and bass, I'd say it's been kind of a roller coaster. We've had our ups and downs over the last few years.
Yeah, I do. I personally think it's on an upswing at the moment. There was definitely a sort of a fallow period, but as I said, with drum and bass, there's always going to be this very die-hard following. So it's like, I've still always been out working. Not as much, say, as the late '90s or whatever, but that was like the golden years for everybody, I think. But I think I'm noticing this sort of, there's this huge influx of people that's like, we can't avoid talking about the whole dubstep phenomenon.
Yeah, that was on your
it's like there's been a huge influx of kids, obviously a new generation of kids that have come in through that.
So what are your thoughts about that?
I think, dubstep itself, or certainly what is so popular, that the sort of form that is so popular, it's not really my thing. For me, it's got way too much of a rock sensibility, which has never been my thing. That whole sort of, you know, metal fonts and it's raging face and it's, yeah, bro. It's just, it's too, you know, all the stage diving and,
I think,
you know, all that.
People are,
yeah, it's just never been my thing. It's not, I'm not like sort of it's not like some sort of political stand I'm taking. It's just like it's never been my thing. You know, I got into sort of electronic music and all that stuff because I just didn't want anything to do with that kind of thing, because that's what most people were doing, certainly where I came from.
Right.
So it's like I just can't embrace that whole thing, and also, you know, just the vibe of it is too slow.
Yeah.
I don't care what you can call it, 140 BPM all day. That shit is 70 beats per minute, and it's like. Yeah, I don't care what the Ableton readout says. It's 70 beats. That's the vibe of it. It sounds, it feels like 70 beats per minute. So that's why it's just not my thing.
It doesn't flow with your tempo.
Exactly. I'm an old raver. You know? It's like I just can't get input. But at the same time, it has brought in this whole new generation of kids who, you know, I fully expect that a large proportion of them aren't really going to be looking for anything else except that. But there is going to be a certain proportion who are going to be a little more open-minded and will be like, oh, you know what, let me see what else is out there. Just like when, you know, there was a big influx of sort of hip-hop people into jungle in like 95, 96, when they were using all the Wu-Tang samples and stuff. And a lot of the hip-hop people, that's all they were interested in, and once the hip-hop went out of jungle, so did they. Yeah. But there was also a certain amount of people who were more open-minded, who were like, you know what, this is kind of cool, and they stuck with it and stayed with it. And that's what I think is going to happen with, I think, for me personally, the whole dubstep thing as well, or certainly what's so popular, and I think this is across the board in bass music. This is kind of a complaint a bitching moan I have at the moment. It's like I spent about an hour. Hey, I don't give a shit. I'm just going to tell the truth.
All right.
This applies to drum and bass too. I'm not just singling out other things. At the moment, in bass music, I guess in general, for want of a better term, you know, I was on Beatport and I just decided to listen through, you know, all the charts, all of the bass music charts, and every single one of them, they were all using the same sounds in drum and bass. In dubstep, in electro, they were all using the same 5 or 6 sounds. Yeah. And I've never encountered a time when that was the case. Across so many genres, so many producers were using the same few sounds.
I think that may have something to do with the EDM culture that's happening in America, though. And I've never been to Beatport, well, not in a long time anyway. But the stuff that I'm getting inspired by is under the category of bass music. It doesn't all sound like the same. No, like at that party we were at the other night, and that DJ before us was just playing one thing after another that sounded...
What I'm talking about is what's the top 10 on Beatport in these charts. I'm talking about the mainstream form. Yeah, of course, there's cool, weird, dubby shit. There's cool, weird dubstep. There's sort of reggae dubstep, which you know, I have a mix from a guy from Vegas that I listen to at home and stuff. And you know, there's a Marcus Visionary mix that's mostly dubstep and sort of bass music, but it's different. Yeah. It's more sort of reggae influenced.
Here's the thing. What dubstep came out of Croydon 10 years ago. What's being played in America is not what that was. What's happened in America is something...
I absolutely... Right, so you're schooling me on dubstep. I know all of this.
I'm trying to say that there